exciting, and the more you do it, the more you think, oh, okay, I could do that again. Or, you know, I could, you know, if somebody asked me to do some video stuff with them or an Instagram live or anything like that, you think, oh, well, I've done this, so that means that I could probably do that too. So it's just, if you are able to just take the tiny steps each day that are just give you that confidence and show you that you can do it, you know, it makes such a big difference.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was the same with podcasts, actually. I had started listening to business podcasts and really enjoying it and getting loads of value out of it. And a friend of mine, who's another photographer, asked if I would come on his podcast. And I was a little bit like, oh, I don't know if that's something I could do. What if I say something stupid? Or, you know, all of the silly fears that run through our head. But I did it. And that night I came off the call and I said to my husband, I love that. I would do that all the time if I could. And then obviously from there now I've been on a few other podcasts, and now I have one of my own. So it's funny how sometimes, as you say, just saying yes to something can turn into such a big opportunity and can really make you think then when somebody else asks you to do something that is outside of that comfort zone, well, look how well it turned out the last time. Who knows what could happen if you just give it a shot? So yeah, I think that's great advice. So
yeah. Oh no, carry on. I was just going to say, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, well, you were speaking quite a bit about goals there, and this is something I'm really curious about. So I'm curious to know, when you start working with a client, I imagine some of them might not have goals yet in their head, but some might think that they know where they want things to go, or they might think they know exactly what lifestyle they want. Do you find, though, that in getting people to sort of dig a little bit deeper and talk about these things, do you find that for a lot of people those goals quickly change or evolve or end up in a totally different area than where they started?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. I think the great thing about being a coach is that the whole session is led by the client. Every session is led by the client. So you might find that one day they might turn up, and if you're doing coaching where you know each session is just whatever the client needs, which is, you know, kind of what most coaches do. Some coaches have a program, and say, for example, that's probably more group coaching. So in a group coaching situation, there's probably more like a structure to each session that kind of has a focus or a theme for that particular session. But in one-to-one, you can find that people will come, and one week they want to talk about a particular goal that they've got, and the next week they'll have had a week to, you know, implement the action steps, or to think more about it, or to flesh it out a bit more. And they might come back and actually say, do you know what, I've changed that, I've tweaked that a little bit. So I think that's just part and parcel of the process. And, you know, that's what I like about it, is that actually it needs to serve the client's, you know, your client's goals. Really, it needs to serve what's happening in their life right now. And that's what is hard when, you know, if you think about being too prescriptive, it makes that really difficult then, because, you know, circumstances change, which makes goals change, which makes, you know, how able people are to do their action steps and things change. So it's just about going with what the client needs at that time, and being flexible around the fact that it's likely to change. And that's okay, because actually I'm not there to say what's right or wrong about a goal. And that's what I think is so nice about coaching, is that, you know, that's not my job, is to say, oh, I wouldn't do that, you know, or, oh, are you sure about that goal? Because actually it's not my business, it's not my place. My place is to be like, this is what the client wants to work on, and that's what we work on. So, you know, and again, it's that kind of journey that the client has to go on to realize that maybe actually that goal that they had right when they first started working with me just isn't relevant now, or opportunities have come up that have changed everything, and they now need to go in a new direction. But it just needs to be whatever works for them.
Well, and that's great. And it's great that if you work with somebody over a long period of time, you will see those changes, and you'll be able to say, like, okay, this was a goal at the start, but actually if we revisit this, it maybe doesn't apply. You know, and that's something that you can maybe help them discover themselves, or come to that conclusion themselves. But it must be quite nice to work with people over that period of time and watch their business develop and their own mindset develop along with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what I think I found most had luck, so most enjoyable, it's just people's confidence. They just become more decisive. They become more able to take risks and to try new things and to step out of their comfort zone and to realize that that if they fall, and there's always a support network to catch them, me included. And I think it's when you step over off that cliff face, isn't it, when you're thinking about making a decision, you think, I've just got to step off and I'm going to probably fall for a bit, but actually there will always be a net of some sort to catch me. And if it had to be that, I remember when I first started talking about leaving teaching, and I was panicking about it, really panicking, thinking, oh my gosh, I've never done anything else. As a 21-year-old out of university, I became a teacher. And it was, what do I do if this doesn't work? And one of my friends said to me in such a simple way, she just said, "You'll just be a supply teacher." And I was like, oh yeah. She was like, if the worst came to the worst and all of this failed, she said, you have a skill, you could sign up to a supply agency and then just go and do that for a bit. And I was like, and it just gave me that almost permission to take that step, something so simple. And I think coaches can sometimes sort of say those, not obviously say it as like that, but you would say, like, a question would be, okay, so when have you done something like this before? And normally people have made big life decisions at various stages in their life. And when that happened, when you did that last time, who did you turn to for support? What worked last time when you did this? What did you find helped you make that decision? And it's only when people start to backtrack and think, oh yeah, I have made really big decisions before. What worked last time? Well, it was talking to this person, or going here and getting advice from this, or reading about this, or learning, or going and taking a course to learn about something. People have always had experiences that they sometimes forget about, unless you sort of say to them, really focus them down and say, okay, if the worst happened, what would be the worst? And then saying to them, okay, if that happened, what would you do? And preparing them for it. Because actually, if you know that there's a plan in place, if you fell all the way down to the bottom of that cliff, what would be there? And knowing that you've got a plan in place if that ever happened, then that makes that step so much more manageable. And I think that's what I try to do, is to support and say to people that this is the plan that you've got, and this should support you if for any reason it fell apart. And Tim Ferriss is great. I don't know if you listen to his podcast, but he talks about fear planning, and he has his top 10 fears, and he writes them down, and he makes a plan for each of them. So if that worst thing happened, he's already got something in place. And it's a TED talk on YouTube, and he talks about it. It's really interesting, and it says it helps him make all these big decisions because he knows there's something in place if it should all fall apart. And he said, I've never ever had to use one, because inevitably it doesn't all fall apart, but it's there in case. So it's a good one to listen to.
I'll definitely give that a listen. I know of him, but I've not watched that specific TED Talk. So that sounds great. And you actually kind of answered my last question for you with that. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was going to ask you, because I think that for most people that are taking this leap into entrepreneurship, I think for most people, taking the first step is the scariest bit. It's kind of like, once you make the decision, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm leaving this job or this career, and I'm just going to go for it. So how do you get yourself to take that first step? And perhaps something like this fear planning and working out your worst case scenario and what you would do if that happened. Maybe that's the right place to start.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that I often talk to people about, is when they inevitably, people will come and say, I've got this idea, but I don't know how to start. I don't know how to get going. And when you unpick the I don't knows, they do know exactly what they want to do. They do know exactly the things that they'd have to do to be able to do it, because you do know because it won't be when they come to a coach, it's not the first time they've ever thought about it. They haven't just woken up that morning and thought, oh, do you know what? I think I'm going to ditch this and do something else. It's been something that they've been thinking about for weeks, months, years, where they keep putting it off and putting it off, and then something happens that triggers them to be like, no, this is now something I'm going to do seriously. And I think it's trying to get them to sort of to be again in that mindset of understanding their fears, understanding that that there is, by not running away from their fears, by actually tackling them head on, by verbalizing them, even if you think this is going to sound really silly if I say this. Actually, it's not silly, because it means something to you, and that's not anybody else's judgment to make. If it's something that worries you, if it's something that's stopping you taking that first step, then it's worth talking about. It's worth discussing and thinking about. Is it, I like to talk, is it something that's based in fact? So can you not do it for an actual fact? So if, for example, because I'm a writer as well, I always talk about writing books, so I'm sorry, I always use that as but if someone says to me, I could never write a book, I'll always say to them, okay, what facts have you got that back that up? Can you write? Can you physically pick up a pen? Yes, of course. Is there any facts that said you can't write? So it might be maybe they didn't do very well at school at writing, for example. But predominantly it tends to be that people make things up as fiction. So I would say, where's your evidence for that? What evidence have you got that you couldn't do that? And there's nothing that's normally based on it's just all your beliefs, all your limiting beliefs, and things that you've picked up over the years that you assume are right, and that you assume that just must be true because you've always felt like that. And it's only when you start to say, okay, but if you didn't feel like that, or if you did feel that if you could write a book, what kinds of things would you be saying to yourself? Or if you could write your book, what would you what would be the first thing you needed to do? And then immediately be like, well, I mean, if I was a writer, I'd probably map out my chapters, or I'd probably have a think about what I wanted to include. And there you go, there's your first step. And it's only through sort of having that conversation of saying, well, if you did do that, if you did start your business, what would that look like? What would that business really look like to you? And they already know straight away what that looks like, because you've been picturing it in your head for all this time. You've just never been able to take the step and actually build it. So yeah, I think it's about addressing those fears and feeling confident to talk about them.
That's great advice. And I think taking that first step, while it's immensely difficult, it's such a relief when you do. You said that earlier, that you just felt this relief when you finally made that call. And I think for a lot of people it's the same. And yes, running a business is difficult. It requires a ton of blood, sweat and tears, and probably way more hours than possibly even than you worked before at the start. But you're building something just for yourself. And I think that just having that kind of reminder in the back of your head, what your goals are and what kind of life you want and why you left your previous career or job or the position you were in, that's usually enough to kind of get through those tough days, or that's what I found anyways. I don't know about yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's like you say, it's just having those reminders. And I'm very much a person who practices meditation and visualization and kind of thinking. And each morning I'm always thinking about, okay, why am I doing this? And finding your why is incredibly important. And if you haven't read or watched Simon Sinek, he's a guy who's got a book called Start With Why. And it's all about why certain businesses have succeeded more than others. And it's about, they really address why they're there. And his TED Talk, again, is a great one. If you're feeling a bit like you can't really remember why you bothered starting this, his is a good one as a kind of pick me up. But some people have vision boards prominently displayed, so that when you're having a moment where you feel like I felt in the last year or so, sometimes you think, oh, do you know what, maybe I'll just go back to teaching. This is because that's easier than trying to work out how on earth I'm supposed to put together a social media strategy. It's just all those things where you think, this is really difficult. I'm sure there must be a way that maybe going back to teaching is just easier, and that's just part of the journey. And I think having the mindset to realize that those days are going to happen, and that when they do happen, it's okay that that's happening, that it's natural, and that everybody who's been on this